From the Toronto Star, I'm Adrian Shung, and this matters. The calls for a vaccine passport are getting louder. You want to go to the gym, eat inside a restaurant, watch the Raptors play, show your vax status. So why isn't Ontario creating a vaccine passport? Supporters say vaccine passports boost vaccination rates and can help protect businesses from another round of lockdowns. They're already being used around the world, in New York and in France, and the pressure is really building after Quebec announced their passport system for anyone wanting to access non-essential services. So has the Canadian federal government, which is mandating a proof of vaccination for all travelers. But Ontario Premier Doug Ford is taking a hard stance against it.
No, we aren't doing it. Simple as that. We're just going to move forward. Now, if it's federal, getting across the border, that's up to the federal government. The answer is no. We aren't going to do it. We aren't going to have a split society.
Joining This Matters, Rob Benzie, the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief. We'll talk about the politics around it and whether the Ontario government is any closer to creating a passport system. Rob, thanks for joining. Great to talk to you.
My pleasure, Adrian.
Vaccine passports are on everyone's lips and thoughts right now, especially in recent days, when we've seen two big developments on that front. The federal government will introduce a passport system for travelers. Quebec is introducing a sweeping vaccine passport system for people wanting to go to businesses and gyms. That's starting in September. Where does the Ontario government stand on this issue?
Well, Adrian, the Ontario government, for reasons that elude me, frankly, still is opposed to having a provincial vaccine certificate. And that's because they say, well, look, there's going to be a federal one. So it's kind of reminding me a little bit of and you and I talked about this on the show much earlier, on the podcast earlier in the year, on paid sick leave. Remember, they resisted because there was a federal paid sick leave program. Finally, they did a provincial paid sick leave program, and the issue went away as a political problem for them. So I have a feeling that's what could end up happening with this. They are resistant to it for reasons that aren't really necessarily practical or pragmatic, but just they're concerned about the optics, because there is a very small group of conservatives. Ford is not among this group, by the way, that would think of this as kind of some kind of a police state kind of thing, to have a vaccine card to separate the people who have vaccines and the people who don't. I actually think that it's kind of the wrong way of looking at it, because 80% of people have their first shots, and Ford's own people believe they will get to 90% vaccinated by the end of this year, fully vaccinated. So it's a fringe element that doesn't want to get vaccinated. It's a mainstream thing in Canada to get vaccinated. And Ontario is the leading jurisdiction in the country for vaccinations, and in part because the government has been pushing it so hard. So this is why I don't understand why they wouldn't, to try to get that last high-hanging fruit of people who haven't got the shots, why they wouldn't use this as a motivating factor. Like just saying, look, get your vaccine pass. If I were them, Adrian, I would call it an open for business card. And I would say, you get this card, it proves you've got your vaccinations, so that you can show it to businesses who want to ask. You can't make it so that you can't go into a business without being vaccinated. You're going to have some civil liberties issues there. But we've seen the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, the Nurses Association, the Medical Association, the Long-Term Care Association, all want to see some kind of a provincial card, certificate. Why not just appease them and end this as a political issue? And again, call it the open for business card. You don't have to call it a vax card or whatever. And you just give it so that your barber or my barber could say, oh, I just want to double check. Are you vaccinated? Yeah, I am. And, I could say I'm not willing to share that personal information with you, but given that 90% of people will be vaccinated by year's end, not really a hugely controversial thing to ask someone if they've been vaccinated.
Yeah, that is an interesting part of it, the business side of it, because, even Quebec's health minister, he explicitly framed their system as being done to protect businesses from another lockdown as we enter the fourth wave, as the Delta variant becomes a real problem this fall.
To avoid closing activities or businesses, the best way is vaccination. But we will also use the vaccination passport.
And as you mentioned, business groups have come out in favor of some kind of proof or passport system. So what is the gap there? Because this is a premier who is famously pro-business, pro-economy, loves talking about it. And so there's a gap here of what businesses want and what this province is doing.
I think that he is deeply torn because of the optics of what a vaccine card would suggest. It would say, look, there are haves and haves not. And even though 90% will be haves, I'm not really sure why he's so concerned about that 10%. Now, I know that they've done research on public opinion research on whether vaccine passports are acceptable. I think that they are. I think that it's, there's some people who don't like the idea of the government knowing your private health information, but the government knows your private health information anyway. I mean, we all have Ontario health cards. Our Ontario health card on the back has embedded in that we've been vaccinated or not vaccinated because you have to show your health card when you get your shots. So when I got my second shot, they scanned it and said they knew the date that I'd had my first shot and what vaccine I'd received. So that information is there.
Right. So they already know. Yeah.
They already know. It's just that it's not like, you have to show your ID when you go to a bar when you're 19 or, you know what I mean? Like it's a little different than that. And I think they are concerned that you're going to have a situation where businesses are carding people to say, are you vaccinated? And they're concerned about that. They said they don't want to have a situation where there are certain communities where there is vaccine hesitancy, where, they're not able to go to a grocery store, because they haven't been vaccinated. There's like that kind of a concern. It's easy to say this is a great solution. And frankly, Adrian, I actually don't think it is the ultimate solution to the pandemic. I think it's something they probably should do just because it's a politically practical thing to do. But I think ultimately we've seen that even though we're vaccinated, people can still get COVID-19. We're just not dying from it the way that we were a year ago. And that's a really good thing. But I think Dr. Kieran Moore, the Chief Medical Officer of Health, made a very good point the other day when he said, we're going to have to live with this thing. Like it's here to stay, just like the flu is here, just like colds are here. And it's just a matter of learning how to live with it. And I think that the thing about a vaccine passport or vaccine certificate is the government can at least say they did it, so that if we do have to have a lockdown in the fall, they can say, look, we tried everything. But if they don't do it, they didn't try everything.
We'll be right back. I'm interested in the politics of this too, because when we're talking about public opinion, right, the concept of vaccine passports is popular. A majority of Canadians, I believe 66% of them, support vaccine passports. That's according to an Angus Reid poll released in July. We've seen other jurisdictions, Quebec, Manitoba, PEI, they all require proof of vaccination. So from a political standpoint, this seems like a no-brainer, right? Like this is an easy win for this government. Why is it still such a non-starter for them?
That's the $64,000 question, because I cannot understand why they haven't done it, other than the fact that they're worried that some conservatives are going to say, how dare you do this? How could you do this? The Liberal leader, Stephen Del Duca, has said that it should happen. Andrea Horwath, who initially was opposed, is now kind of saying that she was, I guess, initially opposed to mandatory vaccines for education and healthcare workers. Now she's in favor of that. So Mike Schreiner, the Green leader, all of the three opposition leaders would like to see some form of certification. But it's an interesting little political issue because unions don't necessarily want mandatory vaccinations. I mean, we've seen this. I mean, like, I don't know what at the Toronto Star, if we are going to have to be vaccinated to go into the newsroom. I don't know if we've decided that, but I can bet that if our management said, yes, you should be vaccinated, I bet our guild at Unifor would say, well, hold on a second here. You know what I mean? So I think there is a balancing act. It's not a purely right-left issue, I think, because the teachers' unions, for example, don't want to mandate vaccines for their members. They would like the government to get everyone vaccinated, but they haven't said it should be the law of the land. So there's kind of a tricky employee rights kind of element to this. And I think that's part of this. But look, I think doing a vaccine passport is smart only because it would encourage people to get their shots. That's the only reason. I don't actually think in practical terms it would work. The Canadian Civil Rights Association will inevitably challenge it, as will other rights groups, and they should, frankly. And Quebec's plan about keeping you out of certain public places if you're not double vaccinated, that's going to be interesting to see how that works, because that's almost certainly a Charter of Rights and Freedoms violation. You can't tell people, it's a slippery slope. Next thing you're saying, oh, we don't want people of this ethnicity coming into our stores or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like, you get into a really, really dodgy area when you start having exclusionary policies like this, even though it's a good idea to get vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, to the province's credit, they have continuously beat that drum to say you should get vaccinated. Even if it's not mandatory, they have consistently said that. But we have seen in cases like Quebec in other jurisdictions, like in France, when they've introduced some form of passport, the vaccination rate has gone up, right? Like people eventually bend to the, perhaps not the carrot, but they are bending to the stick. And so it has proven to work. And so that's something that I'm puzzled about too, that it has proven to work in terms of getting that vax rate up.
Yeah, it gets the vax rate up. It doesn't eliminate COVID-19, but so what? I mean, at the end of the day, getting the vaccination rate up is the only way that we can move towards some level of normalcy. I think the problem that this government is having is wrestling with is they haven't really had a good argument for not having a vaccine passport. We saw Health Minister Christine Elliott. Really, I was surprised when she said the one reason why they wouldn't do it is it'd be too easy to forge it.
Then you end up with all kinds of other considerations about production, about fraud prevention, of course. We're now getting rid of the red and white Ontario OHEP cards for some of those reasons. Those problems would occur with respect to a smart card as well.
Well, that's like saying, well, we're not going to have health cards or driver's licenses because they'd be too easy to forge. And I know that the government wasn't super happy with her for saying that, because that's not exactly what their line is. So they're struggling with a reason for why they haven't done it. And that's why I think they will eventually come to some kind of a thing. And the federal government, Marco Mendocino's, the immigration minister's announcement that the federal passport will come, the provincial government supports that. They want a federal certification because it gets them off the hook. They don't have to do it.
After seeing what has happened in Quebec, do you see or hear any stirrings down at Queen's Park that something could shift, that the pressure is building, seeing another big province make that leap to perhaps set sort of a template of doing this? Do you see things starting to shift?
Yes. I mean, in a sense, Adrian, I do. But the one thing about Quebec I would caution, first of all, Quebec has been the COVID-19 basket case of Canada, 20% more deaths than Ontario and only 57% of our population. So I know we love to say what a dumpster fire Ontario has been. That's just not actually true compared to Quebec, and frankly, compared to Manitoba, Alberta, and British Columbia now. So I think that's something that you have to keep in mind. The other thing, too, is that Quebec did some really heavy-handed things that just wouldn't have flown here, including having curfews. They had an 8 p.m. curfew in Montreal, 9:30 p.m. curfew in much of the rest of the province. I can't imagine the outcry here in Ontario if Ford had tried to do that. And I know that they did look around some of those kinds of things, but never very seriously, because they just thought it wasn't workable. Because remember what happened in April when they talked about using the police to restrict people from movement. They had to do a U-turn on that the next day when they realized that the police said they wouldn't enforce the rules. And people who are critical of the police were rightfully saying, this could be used to target Black men and whatever as a form of carding. So every time you propose a solution like this, there's always a problem that could come with it. But the fact that Quebec has done it certainly will put some pressure on Ford to do it. But the fact that the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and the CFIB and the Nurses Association, Medical Association are calling for it, that actually has almost more impact.
It's hard to know at this stage, but do you think that public opinion, now that the federal government has proposed a plan that is going to try to see it through this fall, the province has consistently said, and Ford has said this, that whatever the federal government wants to do, that's on them. Do you think that will sort of satiate what a majority of Canadians want in vaccine passport? The fact that the federal government is doing it, will it change perhaps public opinion, but also what the province will do?
I don't know if it'll change what the province will do. I'm not sure that it will, because in a way it gives the province an out, because the province can then say, look, there's no point in us doing it. And they'll use the same argument that you talked about before on paid sick leave. Because, the feds are doing it. We don't need to duplicate it. It's redundant. And then the pressure will still continue on the province. In terms of whether the public wants it, I think the public's already there. When you're looking at a jurisdiction where you're going to have 90% of people with their shots by the end of this year, if you've gotten your shot, why wouldn't you want to have proof that you've gotten your shot? I took a photograph of the receipt that I got, just that I had it in my phone. If anyone ever said, hey, have you been vaccinated? And I said, yeah, I have. Even though I theoretically can say that's none of your business. I mean, we're getting to a slippery slope of whether businesses will be turning people away if they haven't had both shots. But I don't think it's unfair for, certain kinds of businesses You go to your registered massage therapist, they actually don't ask you if you've been vaccinated. They ask you tons of questions, but they don't ask that, I think, for privacy reasons. Even when we go into Queen's Park in the legislature, we have to answer 7 specific questions to do with COVID-19, about travel, whether we've had the COVID alert app go off on our phone, but they do not ask us if we've been vaccinated. And that's in the provincial legislature. And I think that's, again, a privacy concern. So I think that the privacy element of this is what's problematic. So everyone who thinks these things are the panacea to the pandemic probably haven't thought about that aspect of it. And just like when you go I go to Sam James every morning for my coffee, do I expect Terry the barista to say, "Hey, Rob, have you got your vaccine passport with you?" It's not fair on him. It's not fair on the privacy of do you want, Adrian, when you go into a place, people ask you in front of other people, hey, Adrian's not vaccinated? Wait, what? You know what I mean? Like, it's just it gets into a really, really murky area, but they're going to have to do something.
A majority of Canadians still want it at this stage.
Bingo, exactly. A majority of Canadians still want it. And the privacy argument has changed somewhat since the olden days because of things like social media and smartphones. Everyone shares everything these days pretty much. I mean, God, you look in your Instagram feeds, how many pictures did you see of your friends getting their shots,
All of them, yeah. It was like a point of pride, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Rob, always excellent to talk to you. Thank you so much for this. We'll keep following it.
Always fun, Adrian. Thank you for having me.
And that is Rob Benzie, the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. I'm your host, Adrian Chung. Our This Matters team is me, Adrian Chung, Brian Bradley, JP Fozo, Matt Hearn, Morgan Bachnick, Raju Mudar, Saba Aitazaz, and Sean Patton. Our music is by So Called, Mike DeAngelis, and Sean Patton. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us your comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com/subscribingmatters. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.